I never imagined that a lukewarm cup of coffee in a Monday morning meeting room would mark the beginning of my complete loss of faith in people, but it did. And now, as I look back, I still remember the faint scent of diluted orange essential oil from the diffuser, the bright ceiling lights casting down like stage lights, making the whole room feel like a set where everyone was performing their most polished roles. My name is Aaron Judge. That year, I was 34 and serving as the creative director at one of the leading emotional marketing agencies in the region. We did not just make ads. We crafted campaigns, the kind that stirred people, made them feel like they were reliving a memory buried deep within. That work made me fall in love with the industry like it was destiny. I had been with ArcLight Creative for 7 years, from the time it was just a cramped 6-person team working out of a makeshift penthouse office, to when it became the name people mentioned in every major pitch. I had been there through every failure, every suffocating deadline, every time the founder ran out of cash and had to mortgage his house just to keep the staff. I once believed this was where I would stay for the long haul, that I would never need to look elsewhere, but I was wrong. Everything began to shift when we landed the strategic contract with Adina, a global cosmeceutical brand trying to expand across Southeast Asia. This was the kind of deal that could take the entire agency to a new level. I was assigned as the lead concept director for the rebranding campaign, and for 8 straight months, my team and I worked as if time did not exist. From crafting the messaging and managing the behavioral research team, to rewriting every line of copy on every tiny banner and convincing Edina's board to greenlight a campaign with no precedent in this industry. That was the first time I truly understood what it meant to do emotional marketing. We told a story not through the product, but through memory. A short video followed the journey of a son caring for his mother through chemotherapy. A simple banner showing a pale pink scarf and the line, "Care starts from within," with a single touch, no logo, no pricing, just a feeling. The results exceeded expectations. In the first week of the campaign, Edina saw search interest increase 6-fold beyond projections. The campaign hashtag reached the top 3 on social media in less than 48 hours. The press conference drew double the media presence initially planned. Experts called it a spectacular comeback for the brand. As for me, I said nothing. I simply smiled quietly when I saw the mother's face from the video spreading across the internet, knowing that image had been my suggestion. But that Monday morning debrief shattered everything. Ben Caldwell, our CEO, sat at the center of the crowded room, beginning his speech with a satisfied smile. To his right was Michael, the newly hired strategy director, barely with the company for a year. He had not been involved in the core phase of the campaign, but had been present at every press event. When it came time to acknowledge contributions, Ben leaned back, patted Michael on the shoulder, and said the campaign's success was largely due to his leadership and extraordinary ability to connect. My name was never mentioned. Not a word, not a look, not even a thank you. I sat there, next to my cold coffee, watching the campaign performance charts play across the large screen. Slides I had stayed up 2 nights perfecting were now labeled under a vague credit called Strategy Team. I felt like I was being surgically removed from the work I had poured my entire heart into. It was not forgetfulness. It was erasure. I said nothing in the meeting. I nodded at the end, stood up, and walked out. That afternoon, I opened my email and found a message from HR inviting me to a session titled Creative Structure Realignment, scheduled for the weekend. A familiar phrase. I had seen it 2 years earlier when the former content director was quietly let go without explanation. I knew what was happening. The next day, I was officially removed from the Adina team. The stated reason was strategic restructuring of personnel. I was not asked to resign, but my campaign access was revoked. My client meetings disappeared from my calendar. The Slack channels I once managed were reassigned to Michael. In less than 48 hours, I went from leading the biggest campaign of the year to becoming a sidelined employee waiting for assignments. On Wednesday afternoon, I unplugged my headphones from my laptop and stared through the glass window of the 8th floor, watching the city bustle, unaware that someone inside was slowly losing his sense of purpose. I did not cry, but something inside me cracked. The collapse did not come from being reassigned. It came from realizing I no longer mattered in a place I once called home. I still remember the phone call from my mother that night. Her voice was gentle, asking if I would come home for dinner, saying it had been a while since we last sat at the table together. I glanced at the calendar and was startled to see I had missed my sister's birthday 2 weeks ago. I told my mother I was busy, but in truth, I had nothing to do. After hanging up, I realized it was not just my career that had been taken from me. I had also been letting go of the relationships that once grounded me, piece by piece, in pursuit of loyalty to a company that no longer deserved it. That night, I could not sleep. I sat going through every file in my personal drive, every headline revision, every storyboard I scribbled at 3 a.m. I did not know why I had kept so much. Maybe I never thought I would need them to prove my worth. But now, everything had changed. I began to collect each memory, not to cling to the past, but to prepare for something else. I was no longer certain I would stay, but I knew if I left, I would not leave quietly this time. I would leave a mark that no one could deny. And that was when I understood no one would rescue me from this betrayal, except myself. I cannot pinpoint the exact moment when I began to regain myself. It was not one of those mornings people talk about, when they suddenly wake up filled with motivation. For me, it began quietly, with a pause as I was making coffee, and the realization that I no longer felt a sting in my eyes every time I looked at the computer screen. It was not because the pain had disappeared, but because it had settled deep enough to become part of my breathing. I still arrived at the office on time, still greeted people with a soft smile and calm eyes, but I was no longer the person I had been 8 months earlier. Something in me had shifted. There were no more expectations, no need for recognition, only the urge to hold on to every trace of the work I had poured my soul into. I began archiving all my previous emails with clients, including the late-night thank you notes from Adina's product director after an urgent round of revisions. I downloaded every brief, every draft, snapshots of whiteboard scribbles from brainstorming sessions, and the cloud links to files I had personally edited. I stored everything on a separate hard drive, password protected, and backed it up on my personal drive, not to threaten anyone, but to protect what they were trying to erase. In the early days of silence, I worked alone in my office, pushed out of the main project, assigned to minor tasks that required no thought, but I did not reject them. I completed everyone with such care that some began whispering I was trying to win favor to keep my job. They did not understand. I no longer needed to be kept. I was observing. The agency I once loved was fracturing from within. New projects lacked the flow they used to have. Michael began feeling the pressure of representing Adina without someone to carry the weight of the strategic content. In one meeting, he mispronounced the name of Adina's flagship product during a presentation, and the client paused awkwardly before correcting him. I was in that room, acting as the meeting recorder. I noticed the brief flicker in Elena Varley's eyes as she looked my way, as if something had clicked. I said nothing, just kept typing, capturing every exchange that no one seemed to realize had revealed more than it should. Within a week, I received 3 internal emails from other teams asking for quick guidance on stuck content. They said I did not need to help officially, just a few pointers. I responded fully, even attaching 3 concise suggestions. I knew those inputs would end up in client presentations. I did not need credit. All that mattered was impact, because right then, I was rebuilding my true value from the ground up. One afternoon, just as I was about to leave the office, I received a message from a former colleague who had left 3 months earlier. He had been a senior copywriter in my old team. He sent me a link. I clicked on it. It led to an anonymous post on an internal marketing forum discussing cases where contributors had been sidelined despite doing the real work. One paragraph in particular mentioned the Edina campaign at ArcLight, with the line, "Everyone in the industry knows who truly wrote that key tagline." I did not respond, but I knew the timing of the post was not random. I started to sense the undercurrents more clearly. A week later, during an internal update meeting between ArcLight and Edina, where I was only allowed to observe, Elena paused her screen share to ask Michael directly about the survey results for a focus group of female consumers after the second campaign video launched. Michael hesitated and said he would check with the insights team, but I already knew those results. I had led that survey before being cut out, and I had annotated the findings in a Slack file, a Slack I was no longer a part of. I said nothing in the meeting, but the next morning, I sent Elena a private email, polite, brief, just a single paragraph. "Dear Ms. Elena, attached is the Customer Insight Report for women aged 28 to 40 that we conducted during Phase 1 of the Edina campaign. I am resending it in case you wish to cross-reference the data mentioned in yesterday's meeting. Sincerely, Aaron." No one was CC'd. No commentary was added. Less than 2 hours later, Elena replied, "Thank you, Aaron. Very clear and detailed. I appreciate you retaining the necessary documents. I believe this level of professionalism will not go unnoticed." I was not sure what she meant exactly, but I felt like I had just planted a small seed in the right soil. Meanwhile, inside the company, some teams started voicing concerns about unbalanced workloads. Michael delegated tasks haphazardly, without regard for who was suited to what, or who needed to collaborate with whom. Several mid-tier client projects began to fall behind schedule. Ben held repeated team meetings, but offered no real direction. And every time that happened, I sat silently, took notes, said nothing, gave no feedback. I did only what was assigned to me, all the while logging every conflicting task email, every mismatched message that tangled plans from the root. I did not need to cause the chaos. It was forming on its own. I only needed to document the proof. Some nights I stayed late, watching the city lights flicker through the glass and wondering why I had not walked away yet. But then I understood. The only reason I was still here was to restore my own belief in my true value. Not for them, for me. A kind of restart, without a new office, but with a value system that no one could strip away. I was no longer someone seeking approval from higher-ups. I was reclaiming the self-respect I had lost by staying silent for too long. I first began to sense the shift in the man who once stood at the center of meeting rooms with a firm voice and confident gaze, as if everything was firmly in his grasp. Michael no longer carried that presence. He arrived late to several meetings, sometimes stared blankly at his laptop without typing a word, or gave vague instructions that had nothing to do with the actual progress. I noticed team leads growing uneasy whenever they received directives from Michael without any supporting documents. One day, during an internal presentation in preparation for a major partner session with Edina, Michael presented a slide deck that was nearly identical to a strategic draft I had written 6 months earlier. What struck me was that this content no longer existed in the shared system, as I had revoked access when I was reassigned. But I had kept an offline version and had discreetly shared it with a few former account teams for reference. Seeing those slides reappear under Michael's name made me pause. I examined each sentence, each layout line, and quietly opened my hard drive to compare. Every detail matched. I did not react immediately, but I knew that moment needed to be marked. After the meeting, I sent a private email to the internal legal department requesting a confirmation of intellectual ownership in the event of a creative dispute. I attached the file with metadata, showing its original creation date and time. I did not accuse anyone. I simply asked for verification guidance. 3 days later, I received a response stating that my request had been recorded and all data provided would be securely archived according to policy. I understood what that meant. It would not change anything immediately, but it would serve as a foundation if anyone needed to verify facts later. Less than a week later, during an official review session with the Adina team, Elena abruptly paused her screen at a specific slide and asked what seemed like an innocent question. Who on the team was responsible for this consumer emotional analysis of the female demographic? Michael paused, then answered that it was a collaboration between the creative and research teams. Elena held her gaze on him for a long moment, then gave a subtle nod and moved on. But I saw clearly the look she gave me afterward, as if something she had long suspected had just been confirmed. 2 days later, I received a message from Dana Reynolds, the company's finance director, someone who rarely engaged in conversation outside of numbers. Her message contained only one line: "Be careful," no explanation, no context, but I knew exactly what was approaching. An emergency meeting was called to discuss staffing adjustments for the next phases of the Adina campaign. Michael proposed a restructuring of the creative team to ensure streamlined and efficient idea flow. His list included changes to 4 members of my old team, including 2 copywriters I had worked closely with at the beginning. When I asked gently about the rationale, Michael replied that outdated thinking was hindering innovation. No one said anything at the time. But I noticed the silent disagreement in the eyes of a few people. I did not argue. I did not defend anyone. But that evening, I received an email from one of those copywriters. He told me Michael had asked him to revise some materials to match previously successful formats and had instructed him not to mention my name in any references to avoid confusion about the content's authorship. I archived the email, tagged it, and filed it away. At that point, I began to see the full picture. Michael was not just taking credit. He was trying to erase every trace so he could rebuild a version where all major ideas bore his name. What he did not know was that in this place, the only person who held the complete record of the campaign's development was not the system. It was me. Over the next 2 weeks, I finalized my private archive, dividing it into 7 folders documenting each development stage of the campaign, from the first brainstorming session to the prototype content run. I did not send it out. I simply stored it and granted view access to 3 email addresses. One was mine, one was my personal attorney, and one was Elena's. I sent it with no subject line, only a discreet note containing a password. I did not claim authorship. I merely wrote, "In case you need to verify original data." A few days later, during the Adina board meeting, where Ben was present to finalize Phase 2 of the extended partnership, Elena opened the session with a statement that froze the room. "Before we begin, I would like to clarify ArcLight's quality control process for creative materials, especially how individual contributions are recorded in key strategic content." Ben appeared caught off guard, but replied professionally that all input was evaluated by the team as a whole. Elena nodded, then gently turned her laptop to face the room. On the screen were 2 blocks of identical content, one from Michael's current slides and one from a dated note created 6 months earlier, bearing my name as the author. No one spoke. Elena said nothing more. She moved on to the next slide, but the silence that followed was enough to cut through everything. The meeting continued, but there was a clear tension in Ben's voice each time he emphasized words like transparency, content verification, and accountability. I remained silent through the meeting, but as it ended, I saw Michael leave the room with clenched fists and eyes no longer composed. That afternoon, Michael did not appear for the scheduled internal sync. Ben issued a company-wide notice stating that Michael was being placed on temporary leave to address recent partner concerns. No one commented, but everyone in the office knew what was happening. 2 days later, Dana walked past my desk. She did not make eye contact. She simply left a quiet remark. Some things don't need to be said loudly. They just need to be proven over time. I knew she was talking about me. The most significant turning point is not when others reject you. It is when they are forced to face the evidence that they were wrong. And now, that evidence was right in front of them. There was one morning when I arrived earlier than usual. The office was still silent, the rows of desks untouched, lights off, with only the hum of the air conditioning and the quiet blue glow from the server monitor in the far corner. I sat down, opened my laptop, and sensed that something in the air had shifted, not because my position had been restored, and not because someone had stood up to defend me. It was because, for the first time in many months, I no longer felt the need to prove anything. I had done my part. I had preserved the truth and let it reveal itself. I sat quietly in that stillness for a few minutes, then opened a draft for a new campaign that I had written before being cut from the Adina team. It was an idea I had always believed could lead the brand in a bold new direction, though back then, no one had the courage to hear it all the way through. I reviewed each section, adjusted a few parts using the updated market insights I had gathered during months of quiet observation. No one assigned me that task, but I did it anyway, because I knew this was what I did best. As people began filtering into the office, I sent the new proposal to Elena's private inbox. No loud subject line, no request for collaboration, just a single attachment and a brief note, supplemental proposal, in case it helps with planning phase 2. I hit send without expecting anything. What I did not realize was that this message would ignite a shift in direction. 3 days later, I was invited to a closed meeting between Edina and ArcLight's leadership. The subject line offered little, just a general note about discussing personnel alignment for the next phase of collaboration. When I entered the room, Elena was already there, seated beside a legal representative from Edina. Ben and Dana sat across from them, all wearing measured expressions. The meeting began with Elena offering thanks for the efforts so far. Then she moved directly to the point. We would like to propose a new working structure. Instead of coordinating through ArcLight's strategy team, we wish to work directly with an independent coordinator, someone who understands the product, empathizes with the customer, and has been part of the project from the very beginning. She paused, turned to me, and said clearly, specifically, we would like to invite Aaron Judge to take on this role, if he agrees. The room held its breath. Ben looked stunned. He glanced at me, then at Elena, clearly searching for the right response, but she did not give him time to speak. Edina will fund this role separately throughout phase 2, and if needed, we are willing to work independently and in parallel with ArcLight teams to ensure quality. No further words were exchanged. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze in that room, but I did not falter. I did not hesitate. I simply nodded. If entrusted with the role, I will take it and deliver, as I always have. The meeting ended with no applause and no compliments, but I knew that for the first time in months, I had been recognized not for my past, but for my present competence. The next day, I was added to a private communication channel between Edina and the core content team. Michael was no longer on any of the threads. He was also no longer seen at the office, with the official explanation being personal leave. But rumors needed no announcements. Word had already spread that Edina had refused to include him in any of the recent strategic reviews. Dana sent me a draft of a new contract. This time, it was for a special strategic collaborator, no internal branding. I was now working alongside my old company, but no longer under its authority, a kind of temporary independence, but one that marked the beginning of something larger. That was when I realized I had reached a crossroads. I could continue down this path, continue proving my worth quietly, through data and results, or I could truly begin again, not by screaming for revenge, but by stepping back at the right moment, allowing the spotlight to return to me without ever having to fight for it. That evening, as I closed my laptop and stood up to leave the office, I did not look back. I did not need confirmation of who was on my side or who had finally changed their mind. I only knew I had moved far enough beyond the feeling of betrayal, long enough to understand that sometimes the most powerful revenge through success is not in being celebrated. It is in making sure no one dares to underestimate you again. I had not officially left ArcLight, but I was no longer part of it either. I was stepping out of an old comfort zone, one step at a time, with the same legs that had once been stripped of their agency. And this time, I did not need anyone to hold the door open for me. I already had the key in my hand. I did not return like a hero coming home. There were no rounds of applause, no rousing speeches, no one waiting at the door to invite me back to my old seat. But I no longer needed any of that, because when a person has once been erased from the very thing they helped build and can still move forward with hands that once bled, then returning is no longer about reclaiming glory. It is about proving that their presence never depended on recognition in the first place. I began my independent strategic consulting work for Edana in a small room I rented behind an old bookstore. There was only a wooden desk, a kettle of tea, and the same old laptop I used during those long night meetings. I was not in a rush to start my own company. I wanted to listen to the rhythm of myself again, after so many months spent chasing the rhythm of others. The work came naturally. Edana not only entrusted me with the entirety of Phase 2 coordination, but also introduced me to 2 other brands within the same group. They said they needed someone who understood emotional marketing for real, not just hollow slogans written to shock. I did not refuse, but I did not chase either. I reshaped my schedule to allow time to rest between projects. I set my own rule to only work with brands willing to listen to their customers instead of projecting their assumptions onto them. And what surprised me was that it was precisely this slower pace that earned me more respect. Meanwhile, at ArcLight, things began to decline noticeably. An internal meeting leak captured Ben trying to reassure the team after Edana officially redirected their entire Phase 2 budget to an independent working model. With the main cash flow halted, creative teams faced reduced hours. Talented staff began to hand in their resignations. And more telling was the fact that several new clients declined to sign contracts simply because they could not find anyone convincing enough to take creative responsibility. No one said it aloud, but people began to notice the void where I had once stood. I knew Ben was trying to regain control. He organized training sessions, brought in outside speakers, and even tried to reconnect with me through a message relayed by Dana. The content was brief. Ben would like to meet, if I felt it was appropriate. I sat in front of the screen, read that message 3 times, then typed my reply. Thank you, but I am on my own path now. I did not blame Ben. I did not want to return. Because when someone has once chosen to erase another just to maintain control, that place will never again be safe for growth. And I had lost enough to know that respect cannot be reclaimed through words. It must be preserved from the beginning. At the end of that quarter, Edana launched a new campaign based on the direction I had directly proposed. It was not a loud campaign, but it resonated with what customers truly needed in a post-crisis landscape. Short video clips captured quiet moments between caregivers and patients, advertisements without professional models, just soft lighting and the sound of real breathing. The results exceeded expectations. Customer retention rose by over 12%. The behavior research team reported that this was the campaign with the highest increase in brand trust in 3 years. But what marked the biggest shift for me was not the numbers. It was the final review meeting when Elena shared that the parent company had requested this strategic model be applied across the Asia region. She turned to me and spoke gently. This is the model we want to learn from, not to copy, but to understand why real people doing real work create real results. I gave no reply, just smiled and nodded slightly. I did not need to be praised. I only needed to know I had not made the wrong choice in stepping out from the shadow that once made me disappear. One day, while casually scrolling through LinkedIn, I saw a post from a former ArcLight employee announcing a new job. Curious, I clicked in and found a stream of bittersweet comments, including one anonymous line from a newly created account. "We once had someone like you here, but we let them go. I did not know who wrote it, but I understood that message was true. Some losses are not measured in revenue, but in the fact that no one wants to stay and fight alongside you anymore." As for Michael, I heard he was still looking for a new job. His LinkedIn profile had been updated, but there was no mention of Edina. A friend in the industry told me he had interviewed at 3 places, but none had confirmed a contract, perhaps because in this field, the data always finds its way to those who need to know. I felt no joy in hearing that. I felt no satisfaction. I just felt that it was right in the way things are supposed to unfold. I chose silence when I was betrayed, but I chose to speak when it was time to protect the truth. I did not accuse anyone. I did not force anyone, but I also refused to be erased from the story I helped write. I did not seek revenge. I simply kept walking forward without needing to look back, because true value does not require argument. It proves itself in the end. On a late afternoon near the end of the month, as I sat at a familiar coffee shop drafting plans for a new project, a server placed a hot cup of tea in front of me, along with a small folded note. Someone sent this. On the paper were 4 handwritten words. "Thank you, Aaron." I folded the note and placed it in my shirt pocket. I did not need to know who had written it, because I knew that what I had done had finally reached someone, maybe someone who had once watched in silence, maybe someone who once believed they would never have the courage to speak up, maybe the version of me from a year ago. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes revenge through success is not about making the betrayer bow down. It is about ensuring they can no longer stand in any place where integrity is required. I stood up, walked out of the cafe, and stepped into the fading light of a city preparing to glow. No more pain, no more resentment, only a calm stillness, like water after a storm, because finally I had returned, and this time it was a return that no one could erase.